Rwandan spirit has never died. And today, this spirit leads us into a brighter future.
My name is Jo, and I live in London. I'm Rwandan, and I'm a writer, and I'm also a survivor of the genocide. I definitely relate to the Rwandan youth who's been through something like that, that completely wants to detach from that identity. I mean, after Hotel Rwanda came out, I became Burundian for a long time, because I just didn't want to answer the question of, you're from Rwanda? Oh, so what happened? And I didn't want to deal with that. So yes, I became Burundian for quite some time, until they had a war, and then you have to think, which country in Africa shall I find? And it's very hard to do that. So there was, I suppose, as a younger person who has those roots and who grew up in Rwanda and then experienced the genocide and then moved to a very different culture, where coming from such trauma is such a strange thing. It was very, it was difficult to just identify with that or even want to be associated with that. And just the only way for me to cope with that was completely deny that. And I found that to be quite similar, a similar experience to people my age who went through the same thing. Some just don't even have any memories of that whatsoever, and I do have those memories because it's my family memories, and I don't know how my brain works, but mine is one that remembers in quite minute detail. So for a long time I lived outside the Rwandan community, much to my mother's chagrin. She's rejoicing that I'm here tonight, because as a wife and a mother who lost so much in the genocide, and then to have a child who almost rejects that was very hard for her to deal with, but for me it was a survival mechanism. And it's only recently that I was watching the news and watching the Syrian refugee crisis and watching all these children and all these mothers suffer so much that it kind of took me back to actually realize that, yes, that it was my experience. I was that child. I was that child in war, in the middle of a conflict, and I can relate to how that feels. I can relate to those feelings of abandonment, to the terror, even to being a refugee. Granted, that was in my own country, but that's something I really related to. So after that, I went to the library. Because I'm a writer, I come from the background of script writing, so I went to find, every question, every answer I have in life, I tend to find in a book. That's my place of solitude. So I found, I think, about 3 books on Rwanda, especially the genocide, all of which were written from a Western perspective, either by journalists, or probably the most detailed account was the Romeo Dallaire account, who was the UN commander. It's a harrowing account, completely captivating read. But at the same time, it didn't feel like I had the voice of the person in the middle of a conflict, because what we have is an account told by an outsider, which makes sense because in Rwanda, like I say, our culture of telling stories is very much the oral tradition. But then here I find myself quite westernized, a writer, but with also that history of going through that, and it's my family history. And so I've been in the process of reconciling two identities, sort of kind of going from, in a way, denying that identity for the sake of getting on with life, to realizing that there are worse things than being Rwandan, especially in Africa now, because there is so much to our history, there is so much to that identity than the genocide, and for that's more what I want to kind of convey, convey as a writer as well, which is why I'm planning and in the process of writing a book from sort of the genocide from a child's perspective, but also at the same time you have pre-genocide memories, that 3 months, and I recognize that it was a 3 months, yes, but there is more to that, especially as a Rwandan, especially as my family history, that, and I think even Rwanda as a whole, yes, we have that traumatic history going back all the way to 59 and even time before that, but there is so much to that. And I think people in my generation, when they ask that question of genocide, we tend to sort of clam up and we don't want to talk about it because we almost feel like the genocide is the only identifier as a Rwandan, but there is so much more to that, there is so much to that. And actually saying, yeah, this is my history, but it was 3 months, it has so many repercussions, but it's been 21 years and there is so much more to being Rwandan. And I really loved what you were talking about, you know, writing these stories and these memories as a redemptive thing, really, as very therapeutic, as I've been finding in my own experiences. But yeah, just having that voice, especially in the West and maybe in a book format as well, you know, taking on a different culture. We live in such a connected age, an international age, where I think that we've got the talent as Rwandans living, especially in diaspora, where oral tradition is something that we can embrace, but we can also do other things, if only for the future generations, to preserve that. And I think there is room for that, and I think it's essential, as a genocide survivor, to do that, but also for the voice. I think it's a voice that we're missing at the moment in literature, in the West, of the genocide told from that perspective.